All right, let's hope that this works. Welcome to the OpenRegulatory Conference, which is actually the first OpenRegulatory Conference ever. And this is a conference about startups sharing their solutions to regulatory problems. The goal is of this conference to be way less abstract and way less boring than typical regulatory conferences where people tend to fall asleep. Instead, it should be actually small startups showing like real solutions to real regulatory problems with a focus on super concrete solutions in the sense of like, here's a document how I actually solved something, or here's like a software system, which we currently use right now. And I'm actually going to show you screenshots of that software system. So let's hope that this works. The whole setup is kind of a bit experimental. We're using open source tools like Jitsi to actually broadcast this conference, and it's kind of a cobbled together solution. Well, we'll see anyway. All right, before I talk too much about the conference, and I'll walk you through the schedule and all the technicalities later, I'd like to introduce my co-organizer and co-host Leon, who's here with us today. And yeah, I'll let him introduce himself.
Yeah, so welcome. Good morning, everyone. And very nice to have you here present during this OpenRegulatory Conference. So my name is Leon Doorn. I'm working with Eidel. Eidel is a small startup where we develop software based on AI to detect abnormalities on long CT scans. My own background is I worked for 6.5 years as a consultant for a big consultancy firm, worked for a large industry organization, and for the last 4 years been working with Eidel, where we implemented, obviously, our quality management system, got our CE marking. We're one of the first companies to get a CE mark under the MDR with an AI solution. And I'm excited to host this together with Oliver today, and really looking forward to a program. The speaker should be really learnful. So I think we're looking at a good day ahead, and Oliver will explain a little bit more about the agenda of today.
All right, cool. Thanks, Leon. So what is OpenRegulatory and how did it happen? My background is actually in medicine, so I'm a qualified doctor, but also a software engineer. However, I didn't study that. I taught myself. And at my past company where I worked, Vara, we developed software as a medical device. I did the regulatory compliance work there from the technical side. And later I left that company to kind of be more, well, independent by freelancing. And I did some regulatory consulting. I noticed regulatory consulting was insanely boring and mind-numbing. And that's why I kind of thought, okay, I'm getting out of this field and I want to do something which is fun again, like software development. But before I do that, I want to brain dump all my knowledge to this website, so at least the knowledge isn't lost and other people can benefit from it. And that's when I created the first version, pretty crappy version of the OpenRegulatory website, where I wrote down guides and put up all my templates there as free downloads. Now, unfortunately, the website kind of got very popular and people started reaching out for even more consulting, even though I wanted to get out of consulting. So then I thought, okay, maybe there's actually something really cool where you can help healthcare startups solve some real problems, in this sense, compliance problems. Now, I like to compare this regulatory compliance field to the software development field, maybe 20 or 30 years ago. If you wanted to develop software 20 or 30 years ago, you couldn't tell like an intern or some young person in a department, you couldn't tell them like, hey, go to the internet, read some tutorials and figure out how to do software development and build a website for us. Instead, you would probably need to bring in the knowledge through other ways, because there wasn't the internet and maybe there only were a few books. So you would have to bring in consultants, and that's essentially bringing in people to give you knowledge. So essentially it's you paying money for information. Now, the software development field has changed nowadays. Nowadays, you could tell some person like, hey, go off and develop this website, do this online tutorial on YouTube, or like do an online course on Coursera or whatever. So we have all this like free information, especially on Stack Overflow. We have all this free information available, which someone can use and immediately create something which is pretty good. We have all this open source software on GitHub, and you can use that to scaffold out your application. So we have this transition from information now is freely available. And the main differentiator between companies when building software is only which tools they use, like which cloud infrastructure do you use, which IDEs do you use, like IntelliJ, PyCharm, all those things. Those are like kind of differentiating things, but the knowledge itself, well, the knowledge itself is mostly out there. Now contrast that to the regulatory field. The regulatory field is a bit different in the sense that we're still stuck in this stone age where the information is not freely available. So we still need to like pay consultants to bring that information into our company. And that usually doesn't really work very well. And that's essentially the problem we at OpenRegulatory want to solve. So we want to make all information freely available while also having kind of a profitable company on the side, which actually pays our salaries, which is kind of sometimes a bit tricky. And the goal for that is to have even more articles and even more guides on our website and having even more free templates on our website, which I'll show you shortly. And the general idea is that as soon as information is freely available, and I think there always will be some paid information like online courses or like courses like programming courses you have on Udemy and Coursera. But I think that the base layer of information, as soon as enough information is freely available, then that will be really cool because that enables all sorts of companies to enter the market, and companies can't differentiate themselves anymore by only getting regulatory approval. And then the interesting thing is that the main differentiator will be actually which tools company use again, like software development companies now. And I think there will be a move towards using regulatory documentation tools, which enable companies to actually do the regulatory documentation in a more time-efficient way. So I think that will be very exciting. For that, we have different approaches. So we have, again, as I mentioned, the guides and templates, which I'll show you briefly. We have kind of some premium information, which is a bit like a Coursera course, where it's me doing videos, actually filling out templates for an example project, which I came up with, like a COVID screener application. And finally, we have some free community aspects. So we have a free Slack community, which we're hosting. And there are also the software as a medical device meetups, which are hosted by Jauke from EC. You can also find those links on the community page on the OpenRegulatory.com website. And finally, we have our own quality management system and technical documentation tool, again, making this transition to there will, like in the end, tools will be the main differentiator between companies. So we have our own quality management system and technical documentation tool, which we are currently testing with our first few customers, which will enable companies to be way more efficient and like create the documentation with way less problems than in the past. So that's something I think which is happening and which is really, really exciting, which I'll show you briefly. So showing you the OpenRegulatory website, which we were at just now. You can see our templates in case you haven't seen them in the template section, and it's kind of like quite a few templates by now. So for example, especially for the 1.3.5, many templates done by my colleague Sven. They are already like very, very complete. So this is basically a complete 1.3.5 quality management system, which you can download for free. So you can click here, and then you can get it in all sorts of formats, even Markdown if you're like technically inclined, which I think is really, really cool. And I think the focus on this templates is not that these are the perfect templates which will be accepted by all auditors on this planet. But again, if you Google something for software development, you don't expect code examples on Stack Overflow or code on GitHub to be super perfect. No, instead, this should be like a building block for you to understand the problem better by having an example solution. And then you can still take that example solution and customize it and come up with a great solution without having to pay consultants for that sort of information. And I think that's the main use case for these templates. Then you have all these guides, these articles, but I'm not going to show the articles because that's kind of boring. You have the example documentation, which is our kind of take on somewhat of a premium course where you can actually view videos of me filling out an example documentation for an example application. So it's like a COVID test application in this case. This is not free, but it's because it took me like a gigantic amount of hours to create these videos, but the price is extremely fair. So for example, if you think you're like 3 people and you want these videos, it's like this price, and it's one-time unlimited seats. So you pay once, and if a company grows to 100 seats, well, you don't pay us again. You just create new accounts for those people, and it's included in the price. So I think this is an extremely fair, non-subscription, one-time price model. Finally, we have Formwork, our QMS and technical documentation software, which we'll be loading shortly, where you can see where we have like a whole QMS solution, which I'm not going to go through in depth, but you essentially have like a really cool QMS solution with like signing workflows and all sorts of stuff. You even have a technical documentation feature where you can create your technical documentation in a very structured way. So it links up your software requirements with your stakeholder requirements, for example. And I think that's really, really exciting, and that's where the future is going to be. All right, so enough talk from my side. That's about the conference, and that's about Open Regulatory. I will hand it back to Leon to actually introduce our first speaker of the day.